Shalom, all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Hakodash, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the 144,000 and the rest of the elect. This is the brother Yachana from the GMS Houston camp, and you see from the tabs I got open, hey, this is dealing with slavery. This is Exodus 21 and verse 16, and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Now, this is relating to the UN resolution, that the transatlantic slave trade was the gravest, crime against humanity, and you had three countries, America, Babylon the Great, Israel, and Argentina that voted against this resolution. And then you had several countries that abstained from the vote and other countries that want reparations. But we're letting you know, the prophets, starting with the apostles of Great Millstone on down, letting you know that you Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, you Israelites that have been scattered all around the world for disobeying Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, and breaking his covenant, breaking his commandments, and as a punishment, you were scattered, put into slavery, worship other gods, lost your heritage. There is no reparations on this side. And these nations that Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai has used as a sword, as a whipping stick, as punishment against us, they're not going to give us justice. They're not going to give us reparations. They like us being in this position on the bottom, and they don't recognize our hardships, our labors, our trauma. But Yahweh, and that's because Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai is hardening their hearts to bring them judgment. And ultimately, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai is going to wipe away all tears. So again, and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Now, all these nations that colonized us, guess what? They all supposed Christians. They all believe in the Bible. They all believe in the Most High God, whatever, even though they don't call on his name. They don't do anything that he says. They painted over the true images. They didn't tell us who we are. We're the Israelites. But because of, racism, the things that they made up, the things that they, made doctrine, this was okay. It says, he that stealeth a man and selleth him. Guess what? You're black, whatever like that, you don't count as a man. Here in Babylon the Great, you had the 3/5 clause or whatnot, but being a so-called black man, Latino, Native American, whatever, you don't count as a man. If you're Native American, you're a savage. You're not human, you're a savage. You're an animal. Here it goes. Enslaved Africans were not human. I just put it into Google and looking at the AI. It says, during the transatlantic slave trade, legal and social systems were constructed to deny the humanity of enslaved Africans, which were not Africans. And that's a byword. This comes from an Edomite named Leo Scipio Africanus. It's not our heritage. Just because somebody happens to be in the land, which is the land of Canaan, the land of Ham, that don't make them Hamites, Canaanites. You have Israelites that are scattered over there. You have many nations over there. But hey, this is their, changing of landmarks, changing their names, taking away heritages. It says, legal and social systems were constructed to deny the humanity of enslaved Africans. So you're not a man, classifying them as chattel, movable property, rather than human beings to justify their exploitation, forced labor, and abuse. So you're not a man, you're property. You're chattel. You're not a human. You're a unit. You're a farm tool. That's what you are. And this is how they justify it. But little do they know what they did. They know who they took and they know what they did. So, and I'm not gonna go. Oh, here, I'll just read this one. Dehumanization tactics. Slavery was justified by false ideologies that painted Africans. Once again, we're not Africans. We are the Israelites, and that's not every black person or so-called black person that you see. Not every so-called Latino, whatever that you see, is an Israelite. Because in this slavery, guess what? The so-called white man was raping in mass. So slavery was justified by false ideologies that painted Africans, Israelites, as inferior or less than human. This subhuman classification allowed for extreme cruelty. So guess what? They made up ways around the scriptures. You're not a man, so I'm not stealing a man. But you are. We're found in your hand. We're in your hand. We're the Israelites. We're the apple of the Lord's eye. So, they did whatever they wanted to us. Legal status of property in places like the United States, laws were designed to strip Israelites of their human rights. In 1856, Dred Scott Supreme Court ruling, for example, exemplified this by framing black slaves as property or chattel. And says slaveholders maintained they were superior, often separating families and destroying language and identity to maintain control. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, because that leads up to the next precept. It says slaveholders maintained they were superior, meaning because they have the Israelites in captivity, and it's also on the dollar bill, annuit coeptus, the Lord favors our enterprise. This is the day that we're looking for. This is Esau Edom, ruling over his brother Jacob, having the dominion, and it says often separating families, destroying language and identity to maintain control. Guess what? Your family, your language, your identity, all this stuff is a part of your heritage, you Israelites. All this was stripped away from you. Your entire identity. You're given a new one. You're given a new identity. You're African. You're black. You're Latino. You're a slave. It says Jeremiah 17 and verse 4, and thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. So, and thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue. Let's look at that word discontinue. H8058, shamat, meaning to fling down, to let alone, to desist, to remit, discontinue, to release, to let drop, loose or rest or fall. Okay. So basically, you're going to discontinue from thine heritage. Let's look at that. H5159, nachala, says your possession, property, inheritance, heritage. And it's something inherited. So our language is inherited, our land, our high holy days, the name of the Heavenly Father, his son, who Yahushua came for, our language, Hebrew, everything linking us to these scriptures was taken away, and we were given a new identity. And it says, I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. Where we've been scattered to. Anything outside of Israel, we don't know that land. And we've been scattered to the four winds. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. So we pissed off Yahweh Shem Yahushai. committing spiritual adultery, worshiping other gods, going after other nations, wanting to be like the other nations, forsaking the Heavenly Father. So guess what? A punishment is going to come out. Deuteronomy 28, verse 15 on down. So next tab, it says it wasn't illegal to steal Africans. Just going into the rhetoric that, I'm going to work my way to this article, but, these people had in their mind, like, it's not illegal. These aren't people. I'm not doing anything wrong. These aren't anybody. These are no people. It says the legal status of enslaving, and plus, Yahweh Shem Yahushai took away his protections from us. He took away his name, everything. Who are we going to call on? So the legal, and he gave us into the hand of our enemies. We worship their gods. What are their gods? Caesar Borgia, the images that they covered up, that made them look like themselves, to make themselves look superior. It says the legal status of enslaving Africans varied significantly depending on the time and location. Legality in the colonial period, during the American colonial period, and for some time after the formation of the United States, the institution of slavery, and thus the trade in enslaved people, was legal and protected under law in all commercial nations of Europe and all American colonies. So this was a protected institution. Many banks that you see, insurance companies and whatnot, these were all, around during the slave trade, and they insured the slave traders. Matter of fact, when slavery was abolished, the slave traders received reparations. The slave holders received reparations, and not the slaves themselves, to restart, rebuild. So there's a huge gap. It reminds me of the parable of Lazarus and the Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus being poor, broken down, the dogs licking his wounds, and the rich man fared sumptuously every day until it was flipped, until Lazarus was comforted. And there was a great gulf fixed where Lazarus is going to be comforted, and that rich man, these other nations, starting with Esau, Edom, especially Esau, Edom, is going to be at the bottom, wishing for some relief, wishing that he could go back in time and warn his people, but it's too late. Let's see here. I'm done with that. I'm not gonna. This is Baruch chapter 4 and verse 6. You were sold to the nations. So us the Israelites, we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, the different slave trades, like the Trans-Pacific, things like that were going on around the same time that were shipping Israelites around the world to work in these different colonies but you were sold to the nations, not for your destruction. This was not for our destruction, even though Esau, Edom, thwarted the affliction, went way too far. He's completely destroyed our people and refuses to acknowledge the destruction of our people. But because you moved the Most High to wrath, you were delivered unto the enemies. So we were delivered unto the enemies, as a punishment. For you provoked him that made you by sacrificing unto devils and not to the Most High. So his punishment is deserved. It's not something that just happened randomly. Here, enslaving Africans at the time wasn't illegal, so no reparations owed to black people in vote. Right, so the U.S. voted against A March 2026 UN resolution declaring the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity and supporting reparations, arguing it lacks legal basis as slavery was legal at the time. So we don't need to pay reparations or do anything like that. It wasn't a crime against humanity because it wasn't a crime. At the time when it happened, it wasn't considered, a crime or anything like that. So, no harm, no foul. The U.S. stated it does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were legal when they occurred. So again, this is this whore drunk off the blood of the saints, like it says in Revelation. And also it says something similar in Daniel 7 that it would wear out the saints. This place is constantly harassing, constantly messing with the Israelites. But it's supposed to be like this. We're supposed to hate this place. We're supposed to cry out about this place, about the hypocrisy, about the injustice. So legal arguments regarding reparations and legality. In the legal position, the U.S. government has argued that reparations are not legally required because slavery was not prohibited under international law during that era. And meanwhile, when other things happened, they're quickly give reparations or send money or anything like that to their to their own. The UN resolution of opposition, the US, Israel, and Argentina were the only countries to vote against the UN resolution, with 123 in favor and 52 abstentions, meaning that them 52 that held out, those were all also colonizing nations. They just didn't want to say yes or no. They didn't want to yay or nay. The U.S. objected to the resolution's attempt to rank crimes against humanity, but meanwhile, the number one crime against humanity to them and to the hats is, that small period of time, in the 30s and 40s. But they put that as the highest thing. It says counter arguments. Proponents of reparations, including some cities and states, argue that the systemic, lasting economic impact of enslavement creates a moral and economic imperative for compensation, regardless of its legality at the time. So a lot of these companies benefited from back then and they benefit today. Same thing with you so-called white people. Y'all benefited from back then and you benefit from it today. The institutions that have been set up, you can go on and on. But the next one, some alternative viewpoints, some opponents argue that reparations are impractical, that no one living is responsible for the past, and that Black Americans already receive compensation through other means. What other means? It's like, I got it. What other means? I was allowed to go, go to school with white people. Says white Americans, in contrast, are almost unanimous. White Americans, in contrast, are almost unanimously opposed and often intensely hostile to the idea, particularly when the question centers on monetary payments. The most systemic studies that's the attitude of an Edomite to the idea, the perpetual hatred to the idea, particularly when the question centers on monetary payments. The most systemic study conducted by scholars at Harvard and the University of Chicago found that just 4%, of white respondents believed that the federal government should pay monetary compensation. Okay. I'm looking for the part where it's saying David Horowitz placed a paid advertisement, 10 ideas why reparations for slavery is a bad idea and racist too. As the title suggests, the advertisement offered a series of arguments against black reparations that black, and you seen the name of that guy, I already said it, that's Amalek, that black as well as white Americans had benefited economically from slavery, that reparations had already been paid in the form of welfare benefits and racial preferences. I've never had fucking welfare. How am I benefiting? I've never been on welfare. I've never had food stamps. What the hell is racial preferences? Most Americans have no connection, direct or indirectly, to slavery. What do you mean? But right here, you start to get these things like piss you off. But it's supposed to piss you off. This is supposed to piss you off. You're supposed to cry out for justice to Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai. You Israelites, you're supposed to see stuff like this, hear stuff like this, be around stuff like this, and cry out. Not be comfortable, not be complacent here. That the continuing hardships of some African Americans were a result of failures of individual character rather than the after effects of racial discrimination and a slave system that ceased to exist well over a century ago. Anyway, release of the flock. This is Daniel chapter 9 and verse 11. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law. Yeah, we all went off. Even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of the Most High, because we have sinned against him. So all the curses in Deuteronomy 28, verse 15 on down, and you got other curses that are written in the law too. All this came upon us. And if it wasn't for the mercy of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, sending his son Yahushai, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus, we would be stuck here forever. We would be no people. We would be completely destroyed. We would be not in existence. But through his mercy, hey, guess what? We've come back to our heritage. And now this topic of reparations, this topic of slavery, being the gravest crime against humanity, is coming up. And the scriptures say that when the Israelites wake up, these heathen nations will be scared as shit. So they might be trying to, they're trying to put on a face like, that we're not doing that. That's your own doing this and that, whatever. Guess what? Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai is going to bring justice. And he's going to use it through the Israelites. He's going to bring justice through the Israelites. But he's going to destroy you nations. His son Yahushai is coming. He's going to put you nations in subjection. And under Yahushai, the Israelites are going to rule over you. And we're going to rule over you with a rod of iron. All the things that you've done to us, we're gonna break you down in righteousness. We're not gonna do the wickedness that you've done to us. So, and he hath confirmed his words which he spake against us. Guess what? We went into slavery. We served other nations. Caesar Borgia, Islam, the Kaaba stone, whatever. Those nations didn't regard old nor young. And he hath confirmed his words against us, which he spake against us, and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. sending the basest of men over us to rule over us, sending people that you wouldn't even have around your dogs to rule over us, to put themselves as the beacon of light and justice. And that's great evil. For under the whole heaven have not been done as hath been done upon Jerusalem. So the evils that have happened to the Israelites, it ain't the same thing. The hollow hoax, it ain't the same thing. It ain't even compare. It doesn't compare. All the atrocities done all around the world, it doesn't compare to the evil that has been done to the Israelites. And this is Yahweh Shemi Shai that brought this evil upon us. So this is another article, just touching on the same things, just so. This is an article titled from gov.uk. It says UK explanation of vote on the declaration of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. And this was published March 25th, 2026. It says the UK recognizes the gravity of the issues addressing the resolution and welcomes the opportunity to set out its position. We have repeatedly recognized the abhorrent nature of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, which inflicted untold harm and misery on millions of people over many decades. Its horrors were profound, and its legacy continues to leave deep scars anyway. It says, however, despite our efforts, our concerns have not been taken on board. The UK continues to disagree with fundamental propositions of the text and therefore, regrettably, cannot vote in favor of it. Firstly, the UK, so it says, we recognize what happened. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. And, this is my best British accent. Firstly, the UK is firmly of the view that we must not create a hierarchy of historical atrocities. Now, I know what this is saying right here, and what I tried to put in the Google to ask AI. It said that the US said this, but this is the UK that said it. So it says, firstly, the UK is firmly of the view that we cannot create a hierarchy of historical atrocities. Right, because what do you mean? Because you were the one doing it. You were the one carrying out these atrocities. Babylon the Great, America came out of you. A lot of these different colonies that set up, these came out of you. These came out of Europe. So what's worse, 6 or 300 million? More, more than that. They don't they weren't counting. Doing so simplifies the complexity and vast scale of suffering endured in different contexts. It risks diminishing the experience of communities whose trauma and suffering was felt just as strongly. No single set of atrocities should be regarded as more or less significant than the other. Well, I just read in Daniel that no evil. Let me see here. What did I just read in Daniel? Daniel 9 and 12, and he hath confirmed his words. I'll just get to the point. Which he, by bringing upon us a great evil, for under the whole heaven hath not been done as have been done upon Jerusalem. So that sounds like a hierarchical thing. That sounds like it's at the top. It says, no single set of atrocities should be regarded as more or less significant than the other. What did I say again? For under the whole heaven hath not been done as hath been done upon Jerusalem. No single set of atrocities should be regarded as more or less significant than the other. We should approach all historical injustices with the same seriousness, empathy, and respect to ensure that one group is made to feel that their suffering is being overshadowed or treated as secondary. Furthermore, it is essential and integral to the rule of law that the formation and evolution of international law is governed by clear and well-defined principles. The principles of intertemporality and non-retroactivity are long-standing tenets of international law. Hey, there ain't no. Hey, look, you stole an entire nation of people, and they're found in your hand. You gotta pay. Their descendants. It don't matter if, oh, I just stole this one person, and he had children, and that just that one generation counts. The rest don't count. No, we are still found in your hand. According to the intertemporal rule, and they make up laws to fit themselves. This is why the earth is so out of order as it is. This is why we crying out, because justice does not go out. According to the intertemporal rule, the application or applicable law is the law of the relevant time. International courts and tribunals have routinely upheld these principles. There is equally no duty to provide reparation for historical acts that were not at the time those. I'm sorry. There is no duty to provide reparation for historical acts that were not at the time those acts were committed violations of international law. So, in other words, we're not looking to pay you back. We're not looking to pay back your descendants. We're not looking to ease the trauma because it was legal at the time. You weren't human at the time. These principles cannot be circumvented by recourse to the concept of continuing harms. So, the UK welcomes that states have developed international law such that today slavery and the slave trade are rightly prohibited by treaties under customary international law, and enslavement is now recognized as a constituent element of a crime against humanity. Nonetheless, it is important to acknowledge with deep regret that the prohibitions on slavery, the slave trade, and what are now considered crimes against humanity had not been yet established in international law at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. So that's all I'm gonna read there, because all they're doing is saying we're not giving you no money, niggas. Yeah, I feel bad about it, but I feel bad about it, but actually paying for it, let's not get into the hierarchy of the things, guys. Jeremiah 15:5, for who shall have pity on thee, O Jerusalem, or who shall bemoan thee? So who's gonna have pity on you? Let's look at that pity. H 2550 Chamal says to spare, to have compassion. I don't know what I said. To have compassion, pity, to spare. Who's gonna have compassion on you? Who's gonna feel bad for you? Don't nobody feel bad for you. Who shall bemoan thee? H 5110 Nawad says here to shake, waver, it says to show grief, to have compassion. So nobody's showing any grief. Nobody, they don't care. Or who shall go aside to ask how thou doest? So nobody cares. In other words, nobody's gonna care. They're not gonna show any compassion or anything towards you. Why? Because this is the day that they were looking for. They were happy. They were clapping. Lamentations chapter 2 and verse 15. All that pass by clap their hands at thee. They hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem, saying, Is this a city that men call perfection of beauty, that call the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? All thine enemies have opened their mouth against thee. They hiss and gnash their teeth. They say, We have swallowed her up. Certainly, this is the day that we looked for. We have found it. We have seen it. So look, this is what they wanted. All this time, you Israelites, you have, basically been a thorn in the side of Esau, Edom, and the other nations, and now they've had the upper hand. They had us in slavery. This is what they wanted, to have us in subjection, especially Esau, Edom. He has a perpetual hatred, towards us. It says, verse 17. Yahweh hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down and hath not pity. He hath caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee. He hath set up the horn of thine adversaries. So it's beautiful, because Yahweh Shem Yahushua brought all this terrible destruction, all this on us, and gave us into the hands of our enemies, to an enemy that would not, recognize or have any kind of compassion on us. So while it's still fresh in my mind, if I'm remembering this right, right? Ecclesiasticus. Oh, no. I can't remember how it's. This is James chapter 2 and verse 13. For he shall have judgment without mercy, that have showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. So, right. So, hey, you Edomites, you other nations, you Edomites being at the top, you showed no mercy, and you're going to receive no mercy. Even if you were to give out reparations or whatnot, it wouldn't do anything. You still got judgment coming. The blood is still crying out. This is Psalms 83, and I'll start at verse 1. Keep not thou silence, O power, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. So the hidden ones being the Israelites, those that have been scattered. But it says they have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation. And they have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. This is what they've done, taking us into captivity, giving us bywords for names, calling us Africans, Afro-Latinos, Afro whatever, Africans, Native Americans, African Americans, whatever, Black, Negro, Negroid, whatever. This is all bywords, and they separating us from our true heritage, cutting us off from the name of Israel. They have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation. Because we're not a nation anymore. According to them, we don't have a spot at the UN. That the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. So they hate the Most High, but they can't fight the Most High. So who they gonna take it out on? The Most High's people, the Israelites, and all these nations come together. Having different think tanks. This slave trade that was an orchestrated effort. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, and Edom being the so-called white man at the top. The Ishmaelites, the Arabs. Ishmael, what you see over there in the like Saudi Arabia, around that area. The tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites of Moab, the so-called Chinese, the Hagarenes, Gabal, Ammon, the Japanese, and Amalek, the Hats, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, and it goes on. But all these nations were confederate together in taking us into slavery, in trying to blot out our name. I had this, but it's I just put nations that participated in transatlantic slave trade, trans-Pacific slave trade, and Arabian slave trade. But I can't remember if that's what it's called. I thought it was a trans-Pacific, but it kind of goes on in it, and I'm gonna have to go back and do some more research to make sure what it's called. It says major nations involved in the transatlantic, trans-Pacific, and Arabian slave trades include Portugal, Edomites, Britain, Edomites, France, Edomites, Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States. And these are all NATO countries. I'm pretty sure it's NATO. Is it Netherlands part of? Ah, come on. I hate this stupid phone. Okay, yeah. It's a founding NATO country. Okay. So all these nations participated in the slave trade. It says, and these were major players. It says in the United States, alongside regional powers in the Indian Ocean, such as Oman, Portugal led the transatlantic trade to Brazil, while Britain, France, and Spain, these are the three horns in Daniel 7, which the little horn, the United States sprung up out of Britain, dominated other routes, with significant Arab-led trade in East Africa. The transatlantic slave trade, 16th to 19th century. This trade involved transporting over 12 million Africans, Israelites, to the Americas. Primary actors: Portugal, the highest volume, to Brazil, Britain, France, Spain, Netherlands, and Denmark. Minor participants: Sweden and Germany. Trans-Pacific Spanish and Portuguese trade. This involved the movement of enslaved people, often via Manila to Spanish colonial sites or through Portuguese trade in the Indian Ocean. The primary actors are Spain and Portugal. So, and it pretty much goes on, but it says the Arabian, Indian Ocean, and Trans-Saharan. I think it was a Trans-Saharan slave trade. Right. Yeah, is it trans? Anyway, this involved the trade of Africans, Europeans, and Asians across the Sahara, Red Sea, and Indian Ocean. So this is where they'll be like, Europeans went into slavery too, and the Asians. Nobody gives a fuck about the Asians. Just nobody. When you mention slavery and these people go into slavery, don't nobody talk about what about the Asian? What about the Chinese man? No, it's always what about the white man? But primary actors: Oman, Zanzibar, various North African Barbary states, Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, Tunis, and the Ottoman Empire, the regions involved. Anyway, you get the point. All these nations had a hand. This is Isaiah 42 and verse 22. But this people But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes. They are all hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith restore. So just going to the point, that none of these nations that had us in captivity, that had us, in subjection, has said restore, to bring us back. Let's help them out. Nobody cares. And this last precept, this is Revelation 13:9, and this is at the end of the book. This is the last book in the scriptures. Yahweh Shem Yahushai throughout this whole book is bringing vengeance, for his people Israel. It's showing the end times, the end of this age. So the judgment that's getting ready to come on the earth, very shortly. It says Revelation 13 and verse 9, if any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So Yahweh Shem Yahushai, he's gonna bring this to pass. Good for you. Don't acknowledge it. Don't give us reparations. Be hardened, because this is what we want to happen. This is where our patience and our faith is, knowing that Yahweh Shem Yahushai is going to bring this to pass. He's going to put you into subjection under the Israelites. So, Lord willing, this is edifying. I'm going to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Hakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the 144,000 and the rest of the elect. Shalom.